Welcome. This is Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University. I'm your host, Alan Mendenhall, Associate Dean of the Sorrell College of Business and Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy. Success Stories is a program that highlights the lives and careers of people who have accomplished great things. And Alexandra Hudson, Lexi, is one such person. She's my guest today. She's the author of this new book, The Soul of Civility, and we're going to talk about the soul of civility today. And I want to begin with just a fine distinction you make towards the beginning of the book, where you differentiate politeness and civility. What is the distinction between politeness and civility?
You know, we hear a lot of the word civility tossed around today. People perceive that things are not as they should be. On one hand, there are people that claim, we're just not doing life well together, and we need to go back. They harken back to this golden age of gentility and comity, and they said we just need more civility and politeness to heal our divides. And there's another contention that says no, that civility and politeness, they're tools of the patriarchy, of people in positions of power, to keep the powerless silent and powerless, that we need less civility and politeness in public life in order to pursue justice and equality in our world today. But I argue that both these contingents miss this essential distinction between civility and politeness, whether they want more or less, that there is this essential distinction that politeness is technique, it's etiquette, it's manners, it's external stuff, whereas civility is internal. It's a disposition of the heart, a way of seeing others as our moral equals who are worthy of a bare minimum of respect just by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. And that crucially, sometimes actually respecting someone, actually loving someone, requires breaking the rules of politeness, being impolite, telling hard truths, engaging in robust debate. We're in Montgomery now, even acts of protest, civil protest, that those are actually a way to love and respect our fellow human beings and fellow citizens. And a core argument in my book is not just that there's this distinction between civility and politeness, but that we should aim less as a society for politeness, and be less satisfied with the form of goodness, and actually cultivate the disposition of the heart that actually respects others.
Well, you are fresh off the plane from Indianapolis. I just picked you up at the airport and drove you right here. So we've been kind of in a rush today. But I noticed this morning on social media before you got on the plane that you tweeted out 3 books that you were bringing with you on the flight. And it struck me to ask you, what are your reading habits? Because you have such a breadth of references throughout this book. You're clearly widely and well read. What are your reading habits? How do you choose what you like to read? And how did you choose what to bring into this book in terms of really classic texts?
I love to learn, I love to read, I love to constantly be covering new intellectual territory. I think that was the greatest gift that my parents gave to me, was just creating a culture of curiosity and wonder in our home growing up. My parents are both very well educated, well credentialed, but they're intellectually omnivorous, and I am too. My husband and I, we seek to cultivate that just curiosity and wonder in our home life as well. And so my reading habits are really, in my opinion, the best books lead to other great books. Like, I leave a book with a reading list a mile long after a good one, and that's the highest compliment that some people have paid me about my book. It's like that it gave them a hunger to keep learning and to read other books that I reference, and some classics, some contemporary, but a lot of timeless works throughout my book. So I would say my reading habits are very iterative, where one interesting thing or book or idea leads to the next. And that's how knowledge and learning should be. It should be out of joy, and it should be out of wonder.
Well, you point out in the book that it is not a history, but a normative argument. What is the normative argument? I know you got into this a little bit in your first answer, but what is the normative argument you seek to make?
My book is, to some extent, a historical survey of the greatest hits of conduct manuals and civility and etiquette books from across history and culture, but it's not just a pure history. it makes the case that there are certain social norms and practices and habits and modes of conduct that are conducive to human flourishing and a free society, and there are others that are inimical to that project and are inimical to civilization and democracy itself, and that the ones that are worth keeping and reviving, the timeless principles of civility and human flourishing, are the ones that fundamentally respect the dignity and personhood of our fellow human beings, and that don't see other human beings as means to their selfish ends, but see them as beings in and of themselves worthy of respect. And when I was in federal government, I learned that these two excesses, the extreme hostility and extreme politeness that kind of defined our public life today, and define certainly my experience in government, that there was this contingent that they were bullies, they were hostile, they were abrasive and aggressive, they were willing to step on anyone to get ahead and get what they wanted. And there's other contingent that I encountered in government service that was polished and poised and polite. But these are the people that would smile and flatter me one moment and stab me in the back the next. Not dissimilar to sort of the bless your heart culture here in the South, where it's like you're saying bless your heart, but you're really meaning you're an idiot. And so what I realized, though, is that these two extremes, extreme hostility, extreme politeness, they seem like polar opposites. They're actually very similar, because both have an insufficiently high respect for the dignity of the human person. They instead see other human beings as pawns to be manipulated, pawns to be bowled over in the case of the hostile mode of action, or pawns to be manipulated in the case of the extreme polite mode. And that both, again, have insufficiently see the other as an end in and of themselves. And that we need instead to recover a mode, what I call civility, that sees other people as our moral equals, worthy of respect, and sometimes even risking making them uncomfortable, hurting feelings in order to tell a hard truth or have an uncomfortable conversation.
Well, there's a wonderful quote from the book. It's very short. It says, "Civilization is civility writ large." And I'm wondering if you think that individuals seeking to cultivate civility can contribute to some form of aggregate social order or flourishing, if that's sort of what you have in mind when you say that civilization is civility writ large.
That's exactly what I have in mind. This is in that phrase that you just quoted, that's borrowed. It's a kind of a paraphrase of Plato's idea in the Republic, that the polis, the regime, is the soul, is the individual soul writ large, and he unpacks the individual soul, a just soul of the head ruling the belly through the chest. A society of just souls comprises a just society led by the philosopher king, where the restraint, thumos, the Praetorian class, restrains the passions of the demos, of the many. And so in the case of, but that's exactly my theory of social change, that the subtitle of my book really does say it all, that all we can really control is ourselves, but that enough of us choosing to order our passions and order our lives according to this higher mode, according to civility, according to actually respecting others, reaching across the divide, showing kindness to the stranger, that can, enough of those cumulative, spontaneous, voluntary acts in our everyday, that's what sustains a free and flourishing society, what sustains a true civilization, and it's what sustains a democracy, too.
Well, you grew up in Canada, and you've referenced working in Washington, D.C., where you were in the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. Tell your story a little bit about where you grew up and how you got from Canada, where you were raised, to the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C.
I'm from Los Angeles, originally, born in Hollywood General and Van Nuys.
Oh, did I say, so I messed up when I said born in Canada then, or did I
don't know if you said born in Canada, but I definitely have
okay.
that background there. But
yeah.
My father's a professor, so he taught on the East Coast for a while after being in, he's also a producer, director,
what did
screenwriter. He teaches communications and rhetoric, and so he's head of the cinematography, film, and communications department in Vancouver, Canada. And so that's what took us to Canada. It's actually my mom's alma mater where he teaches. And so that was kind of my coming of age. Vancouver is home. It's where my husband and I got married. It's where I went to school. It's where I feel most my soul feels most at home with the mountains and the ocean and the country, and I love the city. I love Vancouver. But I graduated from my history and philosophy degree not really knowing how the world worked. I know a lot about the Italian Renaissance and a lot about Plato, but not a lot about how, markets or financial systems or just kind of everyday basic skills. And I hungered to discover how and whether the ideas I was really passionate about could apply to the world that we live in now, and how could they make our lives better. So I only applied to grad schools across the pond, both in London and on the continent in Europe. And I ended up going to the London School of Economics and did my master's in public policy. And there I focused on this question: how do I, we put good ideas into practice, and how can good ideas improve public policy and make people's lives better? And that was my crash course in qualitative and quantitative methods. I had my own little political science tutor and my husband, then fiance. And of course, being in London, I only applied to grad schools across the pond because I love history, I love philosophy, and it was my opportunity for my year-long grand tour. Every holiday, every weekend, we were in a different European capital, like walking in the literal footsteps of the great men and women that built our world, and that I had studied and read and imbibed my entire life. So I had my formal education, but I would say my informal one. This year-long grand tour was perhaps more significant to my development, but really loved education. I focused on education in London, and took a role at a local think tank in Wisconsin as soon as I graduated and just after my husband and I got married. And I got to put ideas into practice there. I would sit down and conceive the good, write a white paper, and then share it with the governor's office, share it with the local mayor's office. It was great. And then that led me to a role at the United States Department of Education in 2017. And when I took that role, that was my big break. I couldn't wait to have a small contribution in making America's education system just marginally better. And I could not have been more disillusioned or discouraged. First of all, I discovered that the United States Department of Education, the single largest institution in the history of mankind dedicated to student instruction, doesn't actually care about education. They don't care about lifelong learning, curiosity, beauty, goodness, and truth, these things that I had been raised to love and had been educated in. That's what education was to me my entire life. And then secondly was the interpersonal hostility and toxicity that I shared about earlier, the extreme hostility, the extreme toxic politeness that really defined my public life. Not to paint everyone with a broad stroke or any vocation or city, there are good people, there are bad people wherever you go. The human condition is the human condition across time and place, across vocation, across geography. So that's a little bit about my story and how I came to write this book. I didn't mention that my mother is called Judy the Manners Lady, so I had been raised in this home attentive to social norms my entire life and always kind of questioned them, and I hungered to understand why we do things the way we do them. So those are some of the factors that contributed to the book, and it was especially being in government, this environment of anti-human flourishing that galvanized me to write this book. What does it mean to be human? I asked when I left government. What is the bare minimum of respect that we are owed and owe to others by virtue of our shared humanity, and what does that look like in practice in our deeply divided time?
So you started writing the book when you left the Department of Education. Is that sort of what inspired it, the experience, the juxtaposition between what you felt at an Aspen Institute seminar, which you discuss in the opening pages of the book, and maybe sort of the more constrained, mechanistic lifestyle working in a bureaucracy, essentially?
Yes, I've been working on this book for nearly a decade. I'd written essays and been thinking about these ideas even before government, but it was in government that was kind of the immediate impetus for this project. And you're right, in government, it was deeply disillusioning. I felt really stifled. I felt really dehumanized myself. And I felt like I was a year of survivalism, not knowing who to trust, and when I was just being flattered to be used, and when I was just being undermined actively behind my back. And it was an experience, a weekend away in Wye River, Maryland, with the Aspen Institute, That was really significant, and it was just this beautiful reprieve geographically and the scenery, but also just the intellectual environment where I wasn't fearful for my existence, for my livelihood. And there weren't these two extremes, the extreme hostility, the extreme politeness, that we had robust debate, but we earnestly listened and we were collectively pursuing the truth together instead of monomaniacally pursuing our own self-aggrandizement, which is what it felt like to find government. And it was actually, while I was reading Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail at this Aspen Institute seminar. The topic of the entire seminar was about civility in American public life. And, is America a civil nation? Does civility even matter? Can protest ever be civil? America is founded on protest. Can that ever be civil? And so we were reading Dr. King's letter, and I had, a series of moments of clarity while reading this letter. For example, Dr. King says, how do you tell the difference between a just and unjust social norm? A just and unjust law, that a just law squares with the natural moral law and it is grounded in respect for basic human dignity. And I said that's absolutely right, that also applies to modes of social norms, manners and etiquette. How can you tell that when a social norm or ritual is good or bad, just or unjust? Does this square with the natural moral law? Does this uplift and promote human personality and human dignity, which is what Dr. King asked. That was his litmus test. And if not, discard it, like abolish the law, abolish the social norm. That was a really clarifying thing for me. He talks about how, and in fact, this is really significant. He talks about segregation. He says segregation is mutually harmful. Segregation hurts both the segregated and the segregator. And that it hurts the segregated because it gives them a false sense of inferiority. And it hurts the segregator. It deforms their soul, he says, by giving them a false sense of superiority. But it's mutually harmful. And I realize that the same applies to civility. We hear a lot of the rhetoric today, apocalyptic rhetoric, that the stakes are too high to be decent and respectful to the other side, that they're too evil, they're too wrong, and we just have to be willing to take the gloves off in order to win at any cost. And what we miss, I think what people miss today when they accept that rhetoric, or even embody that rhetoric, is exactly Dr. King's insight, that when we are cruel and dehumanizing, violent towards our fellow human beings, of course it hurts the other. But it also hurts us as well. It deforms our own soul and makes us a little bit less human and certainly less humane as well. So just as incivility, acts of cruelty and injustice to the other, just as that is mutually harmful, acts of civility, charity, kindness, compassion, hospitality, kindness, that is mutually ennobling as well. It makes us, it affirms our humanity for both parties, both giver and receiver.
Well, that's very beautifully stated, and particularly resonant given where we sit right now. We're just
right.
a few blocks up from Martin Luther King's Church
yeah.
at Dexter Avenue, and within the Alabama Judicial Building, there's actually a plaque with the letter from Birmingham Jail with an extract from it on a plaque there. So we'll actually get to see that tomorrow.
And we passed Rosa Parks'
and we passed
on the corner where she was kicked off the
That's
bus.
right.
And I mean, I have a whole chapter in my book dedicated to civil disobedience. So I love etymology. The story of language is always very helpfully illuminating, I think. And so again, as a lot of people use the words civility and politeness interchangeably today, I argue no, we have to disambiguate them. And the etymology of these words supports that distinction. The etymology of politeness is poliere, which means to smooth or polish, and that's what politeness does. It's superficial, it's external, and it papers over difference, as opposed to giving us the tools to grapple with difference head on. The Latin root of civility is civitas, which is the Latin root for all things related to citizen, city and citizenship, and that's what civility is. It's the duties, the habits, the conduct befitting a citizen in the city. And I reclaim the entire tradition of civil disobedience in my conception of what civility, what true civility is, again, distinct from mere politeness and mere tone policing and etiquette. I celebrate, the truth tellers in society who stood up to unjust regimes, unjust figures, who stood up to their fellow citizens as an act of actual respect and love, saying you have, in Dr. King's case, for example, he had all who wanted to be part of his peaceful, nonviolent resistance had to undergo a process of purification, cultivating what I would conceive of as the disposition of civility and purifying their motives, getting rid of the hate, the vitriol, and cultivating instead love and respect for the people whom they were protesting. And that love and respect compelled them to protest. It informed their conduct, the sit-ins, the letter-writing campaigns, the protests. And it was confronting them, saying, you have, fellow citizen, an inaccurate view of the world. And I respect you enough to confront you with the ugliness of how you see the world. And at the same time that it compelled action, though, it took certain action off the table as well. For example, Dr. King never condoned and wouldn't condone a lot of the violence and destruction of property that we see in protests today and that we have seen across history, in fact. That civility and civil disobedience, as Dr. King conceived it, demanded action sometimes, but also at the same time took action, dehumanizing action, off the table.
Well, I know you love the Italian Renaissance. I know you love Plato. I know you reference the ancients in the book, and you reference 20th century authors, Dr. King among them. And as I mentioned earlier, you have a wide breadth of references and citations throughout the book. What are your favorite genres to read, or who are your favorite authors? If you're just picking up a book, not for work purposes, not because you want to include something in a particular piece you're writing, I know you write widely, but if you just want to spend an hour inhabiting some book, what book do you go to? I'm sure it differs, but what are you into at present?
I do love a good Platonic dialogue. There's something about the beauty of the prose and the beauty of kind of touching truth. I feel like my soul, perceives that I'm touching truth when I kind of sit down with the Phaedo or the Symposium, one of Plato's dialogues. But I also, several recurring figures and themes, lifelong friends, are Blaise Pascal and Francois Fenelon. They both kind of write in this sort of pastoral and, in Pascal's case, kind of aphoristic and really powerful prose with a lot of verve. And there's and he, Pascal especially, has just such insight into the modern psychology and modern malaise of our era of distraction and our era of ennui and despair. And he's writing, before capitalism gave us so much leisure time, and before he was writing in an era where most people worked too much and were too hungry to kind of have these psychological issues of loneliness and general malaise, and so he's really a really modern and mind and advanced thinker, but is really an astute observer of the perils of the human condition, defined often by despair. And I do love Pascal. I do return to him time and time again, and Francois Fenelon as well, who just has a gentle sort of pastoral spirit that it'll just be like a daily devotional. I'll sit down with one of those thinkers. I did just finish several memoirs, though, new memoirs coming out. One is by I love memoirs. I love getting wrapped into a good story. One is Rob Henderson's Troubled. It's a commentary on foster care. So his story going through kind of just the broken foster care system, then getting adopted, and his parents divorcing, and just kind of that early instability causing so much havoc in his life personally that he amazingly was able to overcome, and ended up going to Cambridge and doing great things. He's now a well-known kind of writer and thinker now. And then the other one is called Motorhome Prophecies, also coming out in just a month or two, by Carrie Sheffield. And it's about being raised in a home of extreme kind of religious zealotry, kind of fringe LDS, brand of Mormonism overlaid with mental health crises and struggles. And I mean, and how she was able to, grapple with some early childhood trauma and early life trauma that she ultimately was able to overcome in many ways as well. But what's interesting, what I like about both these stories, is that they get to things that I get out of my book that are kind of beyond the purview of government. that they're about culture, they're about family, they're about voluntary decisions and how people choose to act when there's no, watchdog and no government agency, looking over your shoulder, making sure you act well. And like that there's such beauty when in human relationships, when they go well, and there's such rawness and brokenness and fraughtness in families when they don't. And so I've really enjoyed kind of grappling with both of their stories in the context of kind of my work that's just coming out and seeing the world. My book just came out a few months ago, so.
And how good did it feel when you first opened the box and held this book and looked at it and thought, this is the labor of love. This is my, blood and sweat and tears went into this book. It must have felt amazing.
It was incredible. It didn't feel real. I feel like there were so many times where I felt like it would never happen. That there was one time last year, actually, I rewrote my entire book. It had already gone through legal review, already gone through copy editing, and I just knew it could be better. And I just rewrote it all with like tone, and I refined some stories, and I even swapped some things out and cut some things, and my editor was not very happy with me. And I was like, I offered to pay for the new legal review, the new copy. I just knew I had to have those changes because they made the book better and lighter and richer. And I knew it was a service to the ideas and also to the reader. And then part of me thought, after I kind of put my foot down, was like, I have to have these changes. I said, is this self-sabotage? Is this me, actually not wanting the book to ever come out, but it's out. My fears were misplaced, that it was self-sabotage, and I'm thrilled to hear about the way that it's helping people, and I'm just so grateful. That's why I wrote the book.
Well, congratulations on the publication of the book. The book is The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. And the author, Alexandra Hudson, Lexi Hudson, is our guest today. Thank you very much, Lexi, for being here. This has been Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business. Until next time.